Michael Saylor just said something that broke the internet. He said that MicroStrategy has no competition. And before you roll your eyes at me, let me show you this clip, because what Michael Saylor is actually said is way more interesting than what Wall Street is picking up. Now let's listen in to what Michael Saylor had to say.
No, the question I'm trying to get to though is like in 25, like you launching the preferreds, which I think are a really interesting product. Does that change the playbook for all these other companies? And how do they now compete against you? Now you have the preferreds as well.
I take issue with your question. It's an ignorant, insulting, myopic question. Why do you frame things that way? We're not competing with each other. That's like saying, well, like I heard my neighbor bought Bitcoin and I bought Bitcoin. There's not enough room for both of us to buy Bitcoin. We're competing with each other. Now, my neighbor's got to buy another crypto asset? Like
Now, I watched this clip and I watched Bitcoin Twitter absolutely go in a tizzy and absolutely freak out over what Michael Saylor had to say, and even saying things like, this is the most defensive and angry that Saylor has been, and other things like that. But I think half the people think he's delusional and the other half think he's a genius. But here's what nobody is talking about, what this actually means, because he's not saying MSTR is better than anyone. He's saying they're not even playing the same game. And this is where I think a lot of people are misunderstanding and maybe, let's say, a little bit different of an opinion here comparatively. Because, all right, if you look at MSTR and the playbook here, right, they've got nearly 690,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which if you look at it at the breakdown here, that is head and shoulders above everybody else, right? So everybody is saying, okay, and looking at strategy, saying, okay, they have MSTR, this is share price. They have Stride, Strike, all of these guys, right? They have 4 different now preferred equity stocks. And Saylor's whole point was that Bitcoin Twitter and everybody around is trying to pin him and strategy against these other Bitcoin Treasury companies. But the reality is they're not playing the same game, because these preferred stock offerings are essentially, just a level up and something that you could do only when you have 690,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So a company like Marathon Digital, for example, with 53,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet is much better off than another mining company, yes, Bitcoin mining company, with 0 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And this is what Saylor's whole point was here, is that it is not about, strategy versus a meta planet, for example. It's a meta planet versus the other hospitality companies. And that's where I think is interesting, because Saylor continues to raise money, and his preferred equity stocks like Strike, Strive, they do phenomenal. And there's room for them in every single, portfolio for people that want them, right? For people that want to invest and have some sort of exposure into that, it is definitely something that, I could see an investor or somebody wanting, right? I mean, Saylor's talking about dipping into the $300 trillion global bond market, the $145 trillion fixed income market, and the $200 trillion credit market. So these combined are $645 trillion worth of markets that Saylor and strategy are trying to dive into. But what Bitcoin Twitter and everybody around is essentially going at all of these companies and saying that they're failing. Well, what Saylor is essentially getting at here is that there are millions of zombie companies around. So what the next development of all of these Bitcoin Treasury companies is essentially, if you have that pure play model, which was essentially raise a lot of debt and buy Bitcoin, well, it might be on you, the investor, for investing in a company like that, thinking that it would go to the moon per se, right? Thinking that you could look at all of these companies and think that, okay, you know what? This company is going to be able to raise a bunch of debt, so we should be able to get an MNAV or a premium on that said Bitcoin, right? Shame on you guys for thinking that. Isn't that okay? I don't want to put words in Saylor's mouth, but to a lesser extent, that's exactly what he's saying here. Is saying, okay, you know what? you might not be able to find a premium on all of these, Bitcoin on all of these corporations, right? So, maybe some of them, but having a company where you get literally a 2028 premium on the amount of Bitcoin on this company's balance sheet, that is just insane, right? It shouldn't be like that. But if you add Bitcoin on the balance sheet to a company that's already profitable, well, that's where the MNAV changes, right? It's not just about that. I mean, Tesla's a perfect example here, right? Because Tesla's quote unquote MNAV is 1,282. But Tesla has an underlying profitable business underneath their Bitcoin holdings, which is essentially what Saylor was saying here. Is like Tesla is a car and a technology company. But saying that Tesla is competing with strategy to put more Bitcoin on the balance sheet just doesn't make any sense. So all of these companies, that go and buy Bitcoin on the balance sheet, what my theory behind all of this, the new movement, essentially what that is going to be, is that these companies are first buying Bitcoin. They are getting debt to buy Bitcoin. And they're doing it now because they think that, Bitcoin's price is going to go up. In the interim, they are going to be evaluating other companies that they can then purchase in order to help service that debt over time. And that's the longer game. The short-term game is raise a bunch of money and buy Bitcoin right now, because that will help give us runway for 3-4 years down the line. Then we can make some mistakes with these companies as long as they can service the debt over time. And that's how this flywheel continues to go. Right? It's not that everybody's going to be following the Saylor playbook. And I think that's what everybody gets wrong here, is that, Saylor was able to get $25 billion for his preferred stock offerings here in the year 2025. $25 billion, right? There's simply like no other company that can do that. And so what I think here is that when we continue to see how these equity stocks start to rise up and go, right, I think it's just a matter of time until we see, these other companies really start to shine, right? I mean, like I said, it's not that these companies are going to be competing with Saylor and strategy. And I think that that's what Saylor tried to get across here, is like these companies aren't going to be raising $25 billion. What these companies are going to do is they're going to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and then it's going to allow their company to have a bigger runway, right? So look at this line here with all of this Bitcoin on the balance sheet, the treasuries, it absolutely skyrocketed, right? So having a Bitcoin in an MNAV that is way unreasonable doesn't seem to make sense, right? And, over time, MSTR and Bitcoin, sure, it can be a levered play as long as MSTR can service that debt. And that is the biggest thing. Because as we continue to go through here, right? I mean, it's simple. I could raise as much money as I possibly can, but if I'm unable to pay, on that service of the debt, then I'm going to have to sell my Bitcoin and lose out on that, right? So what this is essentially just showing that over time, right, these companies are not going to be able to, let's say these companies are not going to be able to buy a bunch of Bitcoin. And that's what we've seen, right? Is a lot of these companies, they come on, buy Bitcoin initially, and then they don't buy anything additional. And so a lot of companies get flack initially, but the next step in this Bitcoin treasury play is not to follow the exact Saylor playbook, right? It's not to do that. It's to continue seeing how this landscape develops. And Jack Mallers has come out and said that. He's come and said that 21 is going to be buying other companies to help service that debt, right? So as we look at, 21 and all these other companies going live, right? It's going to be very tough to catch Saylor when he's literally got like a 690,000 Bitcoin lead right now. So when you keep going through all of these treasury companies and you watch how they're developing in this ecosystem. When a company like this, like 21, like, MetaPlanet and others come online, they simply are in just a different playing field because they're battling against all of these other companies in their field, right? MetaPlanet is going against other hospitality companies. 21 Capital, they're raising money and buying Bitcoin now, but are they going to be using Bitcoin to buy other companies or, play some other game, right? We saw Trump's media technology kind of going through and buying Bitcoin, but they've got a mining arm behind them, right? So as we start to see how, these companies are coming on and buying, right? I mean, we saw American Bitcoin Corporation, which is a Bitcoin mining company, pass Nakamoto or Kleinly MD here. So, these companies are going to continue to come and buy, but let's just face it, right? They're not going to just be all about Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin itself, like you guys say, like the critics say in the crowd here, Bitcoin doesn't have doesn't earn money, right? It doesn't have a yield or something along those lines. So if that's the case, right, you just need to essentially keep buying or keep raising money. And then if you keep raising money, you're gonna have to keep servicing that debt. And this is why you've seen Saylor basically being the only one able to launch some of these preferred equities like this because of his ability and access to raise $25 billion. Right? So as we start to do that and see more of these companies come online, it's just, a matter of time. We're seeing Bitcoin, the orange coin, doing good and being up to 97,000. Maybe we'll see another 100K Bitcoin here pretty soon. But, as we start to see some of these guys come online, I think you guys don't want to sell your Bitcoin. So this is why you guys got to go to saltlending.com/green-candle today. Because if you don't go to saltlending.com/green-candle, you won't be able to unlock this exclusive offer for you guys. So all these treasury companies are coming online, but Saylor is pointing out that these aren't just treasury companies, folks. They are actual companies that have just found Bitcoin and want to elevate their business. So if you go to saltlending.com/green-candle, you'll get 50 basis points, 0.5% off your entire order if you use the promo code GCSALT-01, I believe. And you could borrow up to 70% LTV. There's no prepayment fees or anything like that. You guys got to do that quickly because we have Bitcoin at 97,000, even though, Saylor and others are getting mad online, so to speak, right? But the interesting thing of, what the development we're seeing here is that even though we're seeing Bitcoin start to do very well and all these treasury companies come on, we're still seeing some negative headlines here. I'm going to check in the chat here. All Nighter Hider saying, if an asset doesn't cash flow naturally, what good does complaining do? Understand the asset. And if it fits your needs. Exactly, right? So what Bitcoin essentially does is it allows companies to extend their runway. And so this is what Saylor has been preaching for a long time. And I think this is just misunderstood here. It looks like we've got, Jesus, I can't even pull up this one, but I can pull up this guy, terribly weak mustache. My friend Luke Mikic with his, lesbian haircut here in the crowd and his fake AI image. I heard Luke Mikic saw my mustache and now has a filter that he puts on his camera. Literally, he has an AI filter to make it look like he has a mustache. So, the guy can't grow one, but I do in a sense understand Saylor's take here because I think once I've listened to his episode a few different times, what I have believed is that Bitcoin Twitter sort of got to him, right? They were itching at him all the time. And, at a certain point in time, we've starting to see, Saylor get annoyed with all these people who are essentially upset at these treasury companies because they decided to invest in a treasury company that has an MNAV of 2028 with no underlying business. And essentially they're saying, and then they're yelling at Michael Saylor saying, what the hell? Why is this company doing poorly? Right? So I think when he's lining this stuff out, he's essentially saying, look, these treasury companies, the market is going to be figuring them out. The market hasn't figured out MSTR yet. And I still say MSTR is pretty undervalued, right? Because of his ability to raise money and get all this capital. And if you look at his Bitcoin holdings, like the Bitcoin MNAV, the Bitcoin yield, all these different things, right? Their MNAV, according to the MSTR share price, is right around 1. So that means you basically get the Bitcoin at the 1-to-1 price simply by investing in MicroStrategy, who's able to raise $25 billion here within the last calendar year of 2025. Oh my goodness, you guys are blowing up this chat. I think this one's getting censored because we've got I think we've got the Bitcoin Ellen DeGeneres here sparking some mischief in my chat. So make sure you guys are hitting that like button because Ellen DeGeneres in this crowd, who's got a fake Australian accent, is allegedly trying to tank the stream, man. But we're looking at these treasury companies and diving into that. But I mean, even with the way that this development is going, something interesting just happened here today as well. The Senate banking draft. And I've been following this very closely on this channel because, if you look at how these basically they're called like money transmitters now at a point. All of these Bitcoin, exchanges, these crypto casinos, these stable coins are now all having to follow these banking regulations. And so they've been drafting up this bill in order to try to make sure that this bill is, I guess, well suited for this industry. But it's interesting, right? Because they've banned tokenized equities, which I appreciate. I mean, at a certain point, like, what is DeFi prohibitions? Like, all of these things are just like crypto stuff. But Brian Armstrong's getting up in arms like this is angering him, right? Because of how much we've seen from here, right? But when we keep diving into how, strategy keeps buying Bitcoin, all of these different regulations, it's just going to get more and more obvious that these companies are going to be able to buy more and more Bitcoin. And they're going to keep on raising, right? I mean, we've even got, much respect for David Bailey as, they passed Nakamoto, like I said here earlier. And because the Trump family is deeply involved and deeply ingrained into all of this, I think we're going to keep watching all of this, right? Yes, Ellen DeGeneres. I think Ellen DeGeneres is taking some testosterone to make sure that I don't even know what to call. I don't want to use the improper pronouns for this guy, gal. I mean, it's an AI photo here, but at a certain point, you don't want to insult people online. So I'm trying to keep it civil here, folks. But TF is saying, I bet MSTR will never let their MNAV go below 1. It'll keep issuing stocks. Actually, that would make their MNAV go beneath 1 if they kept issuing the stocks. Because essentially that would dilute their holdings. By diluting their holdings, they would essentially, dilute their MNAV. But the interesting thing is Saylor tweeted out his MNAV plan for how they were going to buy. So, and it did slip below 1. earlier this year. So, even in July, the company's MNAV was nearing that 1. But strategy has been discounted. Bitcoin is discounted as raising those red flags. This is what everybody wants you to kind of think here, right? That, oh, it's such a big difference. It's all up in arms. But, the premium was always down to get towards 1, right? And this is where I think it's, this is why it's like strategies is head and shoulders above everybody else. Because Saylor tweeted out the range, had a picture of that, and I'm trying to find it for you guys. But Saylor sent, here we go, his equity guidance, here it is. But Saylor essentially came out and said this, right? They lined out the plan. If their MNAV gets below 1, then you will start to see strategy considering to issue credit to repurchase their own stock. So that's essentially right where they're at right now, right around 1. So watch out for that. Then at below 2.5, which is where they are now, strategy will tactically issue MSTR to pay interest on debt obligations, fund preferred equity dividends, and 3, otherwise deemed advantageous for the company, right? Then between 2.5 and 4, they would opportunistic issue MSTR to buy Bitcoin. And then lastly, if it was above 4, they would actively issue MSTR to acquire Bitcoin, right? So, they've told us this plan from the beginning, right? So Saylor and strategy have essentially kept to this plan. But like I said, his biggest thing has not been, we're going to bury all these other Bitcoin treasury companies. No, it's not advantageous for them to do that. They want to encourage those guys to succeed. So in order for them to succeed, he's got to encourage them, right? He's got to have that, help them with that plan. The reality is that, Saylor has had this essentially MSCI attack, this issue with, is it actually going to be, able to get into the S&P 500? All of these different options, right? There's been a lot of chatter around that in the TradFi. But as we start to see some of this, yeah, Joe, I'm sorry. I guess a lot of my talking head videos, I figured out that some of the editing was an issue, so I'm trying to get that figured out. But I'm not AI here, folks. Don't worry, I'm alive. I do have a pulse. But Saylor is saying, yeah, quit being so tribal. Why the division? Exactly. Like I said, I think Bitcoin Twitter's gotten kind of to him in a sense, which I agree with. Bitcoin Twitter is a negative place when it comes to Bitcoin, right? And sometimes you just want to ignore the noise, stack sats in the background. This is where simple mining comes in and why I love being able to mine Bitcoin. You guys can go to simplemining.io/greencandle today. They will give you guys a 7-day free trial and a year full of repairs if you go to simplemining.io/greencandle. And you guys could stack those non-KYC sats. So just in case, that premium, right? You can get tax deference. You could do so many different things where you can utilize these strategies. See what I did there? In order to stack more Bitcoin, because you guys aren't going to be able to do what Saylor's doing and getting a premium on Bitcoin. But you guys can do something that Saylor cannot do with MSTR, and that's stack Bitcoin that nobody knows you have. So while this story keeps on developing, I think at a certain point, I love Danny, and I think he does a great job over there. But I think at the other day, I do think that Saylor has something, here. I think that, when you have 690,000 Bitcoin, the next closest person is 50,000. You're going to be all right. He's going to make it, right? So while we watch this Bitcoin Treasury play develop, I think the market needs to figure it out. The market needs to realize, hey, I'd much rather have a company in XYZ category that has Bitcoin on the balance sheet than a company in that same XYZ category that doesn't. And that's essentially what Saylor's saying here, is that he's not playing the same game because he's a SaaS company with a hotel company like Metaplanet. So encourage those to buy Bitcoin and hold. And Bitcoin is for everybody, folks. Like he said, if my neighbor is buying Bitcoin, then why should I hate on them? I'm not going to tell them to go buy something else. Go buy Bitcoin, right? This is not financial advice. That's not my wheelhouse. I can't. It depends on what you want, man. There's so many different options, right? But yes, we are talking about that Saylor interview with friend of the program, Danny from What Bitcoin Did. Make sure you guys are subscribed here. Smoke the like Cheech and Chong. Go over and bug my the Ellen DeGeneres of Bitcoin on my friend Luke Mikich's channel here, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.